Have you ever stopped to wonder why your relationships always seem to follow the same painful pattern, even when the person next to you is completely different? Why does it seem like your heart insists on choosing the exact type of person who will hurt you, disappoint you, or abandon you? According to Freud, this is no coincidence. Deep in your unconscious, there's a hidden script, a story that began in childhood and that you continue to reenact over and over again without even realizing it. Freud believed that our early experiences, especially those from our childhood, shape how we perceive love and how we connect with others. That means your first love story wasn't a teenage crush. It was the bond you had with your parents. And if this bond was unstable, cold, absent, or full of conditions, it's likely that today, in your adult life, you're still chasing the same kind of love you received back then. Not because it made you happy, but because it feels familiar. The unconscious doesn't seek what's good for you, it seeks what it knows. That's why we fall in love with people who awaken the same feeling of rejection, abandonment, or suffocation we felt as children. It's as if the unconscious says, let's try again. Maybe this time it will be different. Maybe this time I'll be loved the way I always wanted. And this is where the tragedy begins. Because you're not relating to the present person, you're trying to rewrite the past. Freud called this compulsion to repeat. It's a mechanism through which we unconsciously recreate the same situations, hoping for a different ending. But often what we get is more pain, more frustration, more confusion, because we're not aware that the pain we feel now is an echo of something that happened long ago. Think about your relationships. How many times have you felt like a child again? Powerless, desperate for affection, afraid of being abandoned, feeling that no matter what you do, you'll never be enough. These feelings aren't random. They are emotional flashbacks. You're not reacting to what your partner is doing right now, but to what a parental figure did back then. And until you become aware of this, you'll continue to suffer, convinced that love always hurts, when in fact what hurts is the wound you've never healed. What Freud teaches us is that we don't just look for love, we look for recognition. We want the other person to validate our worth, to give us the love we didn't receive as children. And this search is so intense that we accept crumbs, we romanticize emotional instability, we mistake anxiety for passion, all of this just to feel, for a few seconds, that we're seen, heard, and loved. And the worst part is that when someone genuinely loves us, we sabotage it. Because deep down, we don't believe we deserve it. A healthy love feels boring. It feels fake. And the unconscious says, this can't be real. That's why many people push away those who truly care and chase after those who hurt them. Not because they're masochists, but because their internal compass is misaligned. And this misalignment is the result of trauma. According to Freud, every symptom hides a story. And when you repeat patterns in your relationships, it's not because you're weak or unlucky. It's because there's a child inside you screaming to be seen. That child needs you to stop looking for rescuers outside and finally start giving yourself the love you lacked. But in the midst of adult life, where responsibilities, deadlines, and expectations pile up like bricks on our backs, we often forget to ask ourselves a basic but powerful question. Why do I love the way I do? According to Freud, much of what we call love is actually a repetition of what we lived in our early years. Love becomes a scenario where, unconsciously, we try to rewrite an unresolved chapter of our emotional history, and most of the time we fail. Not because we are not good enough, but because we are playing a game whose rules were written when we were just children. Freud called this the compulsion to repeat, the psychological need to recreate the same emotional circumstances, even if they are painful, in the hope of finally achieving a different outcome. That's why people with emotionally distant parents may feel irresistibly attracted to partners who are cold, elusive, or emotionally unavailable. They try again and again to win the affection they never received in childhood, but they often end up reliving the same abandonment. Not because they want to suffer, but because the child inside them is still crying out to be seen, heard, loved. This is how trauma becomes seductive, because it's familiar. And what is familiar often feels like home, even when that home was marked by pain. Freud argued that the unconscious does not distinguish between pleasure and suffering the way the conscious mind does. For the unconscious, the priority is repetition, not happiness. It repeats what it knows, hoping that this time, the story will end differently. But here's the catch. Without awareness, the story never changes. We get into relationships believing we're choosing freely. But in reality, it's often the unhealed child in us who is choosing. And that child doesn't choose based on logic. They choose based on emotional memory, based on the wounds they hope to finally heal. And that's why we end up falling for the wrong person over and over again. Sometimes we confuse intensity with love. We confuse control with care. We mistake obsession for passion. And we end up trapped in relationships that reflect our past instead of supporting our future. Relationships that replicate the patterns of trauma rather than freeing us from them. According to Freud, to change this dynamic, we must face the unconscious. We need to bring to light the repressed emotions, the buried memories, the needs that were never met. Only when we become aware of the origin of our choices can we begin to choose differently. And that requires courage, because looking at our childhood is not always easy. Often it means revisiting pain, acknowledging neglect, and confronting truths we've long tried to ignore. But it is in this confrontation that the possibility of healing lies. When we recognize that the root of our suffering is not in the present, but in the past, we free ourselves. We stop blaming our partners for not meeting needs they were never supposed to meet in the first place. We begin to take responsibility for our own healing. We begin to separate love from dependence, affection from compensation, and connection from emotional survival. This is when relationships stop being battlegrounds and start becoming places of growth. We stop demanding from the other what only our inner child can truly reclaim. We stop loving with a wound and start loving with presence. And that changes everything. Because true love does not hurt. What hurts is trying to heal a trauma through someone else. What hurts is loving with a wound that still bleeds. And Freud would say, healing begins the moment we stop searching for our parents in our lovers and start becoming the adult our inner child has always needed. Healing, however, is not a straight line. It's a spiral, a path of coming back to the same points with greater awareness until the pain no longer dominates. Freud believed that the unconscious doesn't forget, it stores. And in that storage lie our fears, our patterns, and our silent screams. But when we begin to observe our reactions, when we question why we feel so rejected, so anxious, so dependent in certain relationships, we start to bring that unconscious to the surface. That's where transformation begins. Sometimes we need to pause and ask ourselves, is this love or is this a repetition? Am I truly seeing the person in front of me, or am I projecting someone from my past onto them? This self-inquiry is not comfortable, but it is powerful. Because the more we become conscious, the less we are ruled by what we haven't healed. Freud reminds us that childhood isn't just a phase we leave behind. It's a place we carry within us. If that place remains wounded, we will walk through adulthood with invisible bruises, reacting, clinging, and fearing abandonment. But if we dare to look within and meet that wounded child with compassion, we begin to interrupt the cycle. We begin to make space for something new. Relationships built not on trauma, but on truth. It's in this moment that real intimacy becomes possible. Not the intimacy that comes from dependence, but the one born of two whole individuals who choose each other freely, not because they are broken in complementary ways, but because they are healing in the same direction. Freud's teachings show us that love, without self-awareness, can become a theater of unconscious wounds. But love, with awareness, becomes a sacred space where healing is not only possible, it's inevitable. When we start to love ourselves enough to not accept emotional crumbs, when we stop seeing red flags as romantic drama, when we choose connection over chaos, we begin to build a different kind of relationship, one that doesn't mirror the past but nurtures the present. You'll notice this shift when you no longer feel the need to chase those who withdraw, to fix those who don't want to be fixed, or to prove your worth to someone who cannot see it. Because healing gives you clarity. It teaches you that your value is not up for debate and that love doesn't have to come at the cost of your peace. Freud didn't give us easy answers, but he gave us mirrors to look deeply into ourselves, beyond the surface behaviors, into the core wounds that shaped our choices. And when we dare to look into that mirror, we reclaim the power to choose again, this time consciously. You are not broken. You are not doomed to repeat your pain forever. But to break the cycle, you need to stop calling it love when it's actually survival. You need to recognize when the ache you feel isn't from now, it's from then. And that recognition can be the beginning of everything. So the next time you wonder why love hurts, remember, it's not love that hurts, it's the unhealed wounds we bring into it. The good news is, wounds can heal. And when they do, love stops being a battlefield and becomes what it was always meant to be, a place of refuge, not of war.